Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kim Schmidt, Executive Editor of Farm Equipment Magazine. Welcome to our latest webinar in conjunction with the North American Equipment Dealers Association. Today's presenters are Eric Wareham, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs with NAIDA, and Kip McGuire, Director of Government Affairs for NAIDA. They're going to be providing us with a key legislative update as we head into go through the new year. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. On your screen, there's a control panel with a Q&A icon. You can submit questions here at any time during the presentation, and then time permitting, we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. And then, like always, we are recording the webinar and we'll share it with everyone who registered in the event you want to rewatch it later or share it with anyone else at the dealership. With that, we're ready to get started. Thanks again for joining us, and Eric and Kip, you can take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. We appreciate the intro there, and Farm Equipment for hosting us here, and thank you to everybody who has joined out there in the interweb spaces that we can't see, but do appreciate you tuning in here. I'm Kip McGuire, just so you can associate a voice with the person here. I'm the Director of Government Affairs, and I will kind of be doing our narration and handing things off for Eric Wareham, the Senior VP of Government Affairs for NAIDA, who will be providing a lot of the context as we go through here. So, overview, we're going to be largely talking about right to repair updates here. As usual, whenever we do these updates, we're going to do kind of a look back over the last several years, and then a look at where we are so far this year in the 2024 legislative cycle. Then we're going to move on to federal legislative priorities. And that's going to include the Farm Bill reauthorization, some tax reform bills, and then we're going to end on our state legislative priorities and then talk about some of the individual issues that we're looking at and keeping track of at the state level. With that being said, let's jump right into our right to repair update.
Yeah.
All right, so right to repair legislation. This is anybody who has attended one of these with us in the past, I'm sure, is familiar with this format that we do. So we've got the last several years, 2019 through 2022 here. I'm going to stop talking for a second and let Eric jump in, but we actually, I'm kind of excited about this in our next slide here. Whenever we get to it, I'm sure that some of you will share our excitement. But Eric, what do you want people to know about our look back here at Right to Repair for the last 3 or 4 years?
Yeah. Thanks, Kip. Eric Wareham here. Sorry, guys. I'm a little bit stuffed up, recovering from a little being under the weather the past few days. So forgive me if I sound a little nasally and I maybe intermittently cough throughout this. So, yeah, we normally start with this. And I think, as a look back, kind of the purple is obviously where we have bills that have been introduced. And we've had a lot of activity going back 4 years. You can see in the upper left hand corner that we don't, is a little more sporadic. It's spread out. It kind of, the bill sort of morphs where it is introduced each year. And sometimes that's because we fight it back. Sometimes that's because, well, in certain instances, it's passed in one form or another, whether that's household consumer electronics or something, and so it isn't reintroduced. But you kind of see the evolution of it over time, and last year was kind of a whopper of a year. We were spread pretty thin across the country from coast to coast, and in the middle as well. And whether that was Republican states, Democrat states, just across the board, we saw an extraordinary amount of activity. And I think at one point we were tracking some 70 some bills, in 30 some states. So, but this year looks a little different. And Kip, maybe you want to kick us off if you're still in there.
Yeah, so as I was alluding to earlier, and the numbers that Eric just threw out, last year towards the end of the year, we were tracking something around 73 bills and I think 31 localities. And so, we don't have the picture side by side here, but that last map in 2023 was pretty filled up with purple. It was spread across the entire nation, as Eric had pointed out. And so this year, we're still pretty early on in the session, but so far 46 bills in 20 jurisdictions. So quite a few less than what we ended on last year. And I'm feeling okay with that right now. We definitely have our work cut out for us and some tough fights ahead, but not nearly as steeped in the right to repair fight as what I think Eric and I were both expecting at this point in time. So that's kind of exciting for us, from my perspective at least. Just the fact that we're not as hard hit as we were expecting. Bills, we did this breakout a couple of times last year as well. They fall into several different categories. So we've got 8 broad-based, 14 consumer electronics, 3 wheelchair, 1 motor vehicle, 15 ag specific, and 2 repairability. And the repairability is something that is kind of new. I don't know that this is the first year ever that we've seen this, but it's certainly the first year that we've kind of been paying attention to it. And we've definitely had conversations with some of the coalitions that we're a part of, and just what this means. And this repairability is there's a movement, and I think that we've seen it almost exclusively kind of in the Northeast so far this year. But there's a movement to create laws that would require manufacturers and dealers to provide repairability scores for products sold. And I think how that would be defined is a little bit different in each bill, but essentially it's kind of this idea that manufacturers would be responsible for providing consumers with a scale of 1 to 10. How repairable or how easy is this product for me to be able to do all the repairs myself? And so certainly in line with the right to repair movement. I know that there's been a big push by some of the same characters that we see in the right to repair movement to also implement these repairability scores with iFixit and PERG, and some of those characters out there. Um, and our last bullet down there, states with coalition exemption are Washington and Oregon so far. But Eric, I know that you've got some deep dive stuff that you'll hit on all of these, so I'll turn it over to you for a minute here.
Yeah, so I think you're spot on, Kip. And as far as the repairability, that's a new wrinkle, and it really stems from European model. Europe has within the EU has tried to roll out some repairability scores or repairability indexes for household consumer electronics and appliances, more or less. So it's kind of like your Energy Star sticker. You're also going to have a sticker on how repairable it is, which doesn't make as much sense for like an S series combine that has 100 specialty tools for it, and our technicians are spend 2 years in minimum in training to become a technician, and then keep up with all the model and technology changes requires so much per year additional education. And so it's not like it's just a different, very distinguishable product in that sense of repairability scores. We all know what a pain those kind of labeling and certification regimes are. And so I think that in some ways is it's a fallback from the fact that they haven't been successful. Proponents haven't been successful in other endeavors for right to repair. But I would say the interesting thing is one is that this year is an off year in the sense that there are some states that are still biennial legislatures, so they have session every other year. 2 big states that come to mind that are not on this map, don't have legislation this year, would be Texas and Montana. And then there are some other states that used to be biennial, and then they went to every year. But in the off years, so to speak, they're really short sessions like budget years. So Oregon would be a good example of that. They only have a 35-day session. Washington, a lot of other states that used to be every other year legislatures, they have session, but it's really for budget purposes and not for policy, which right to repair would be more considered policy than a budget issue for the state. So at any rate, we have some states that don't have any bills for that reason. but we do see, and I guess they're kind of still breaking it out in sort of this consumer electronics. 14 of those. That's the biggest bucket. We don't have as many broad-based bills. Um, and then the ag specific is the most. So we're still seeing that. There's multiple bills, by the way, in some states. So the 46 bills in 20 jurisdictions can be kind of misleading because Michigan, for instance, has 6 or 7 bills that are still live that are carried over. And we'll get into some of those state specifics later. But I think it's important to note the coalition exemption language because one is if it's a consumer electronics bill, then it obviously doesn't apply to ag. But we do have some states that are like Washington and Oregon that have our exemption that have bills that are moving forward. In fact, we were talking earlier. Kim mentioned it before we kicked off this webinar that Oregon has a right to repair bill that passed yesterday. And it passed the Senate, didn't pass the entire legislature, passed the Senate, and that bill we have an exemption in that was kind of included a couple years ago, and then it actually kind of has a double exemption. Has kind of the old exemption language, and then we have our illegal tampering coalition language, which I call a laundry list. So it just kind of labels it, spells out all the different products that are exempted, and so we're included in that as well. And that exemption is in the Oregon bill. So some states that we would think for other reasons we'll get into here in a second might be pushing for an ag right to repair bill are actually including our exemption, and I just think that's due to several factors, but a lot of work on our part. So with that said, I think we can jump into a little bit of what the rationale is for um, why we think 2024 is a little different.
Yeah, so on this slide we're going to cover here what's driving right to repair in 2024, and our first bullet there, concerted political effort, is this is really coming from it's an election year with the Colorado bill passing last year, which was primary sponsor. Technically, it was a bipartisan bill, right? The primary sponsor was Democrat, and then the co-sponsor was a Republican. But the co-sponsor was the only Republican on that bill. I think there was another 7 or 8 sponsors altogether on that one. Eric, I'm sure you know those stats better than I do. But after that bill passed, really that I think is probably driving the surge in ag specific bills that we see here. Last year, coming off of the heels of 2022, right, as there was a couple of right to repair bills that won that were wheelchair specific, and so last year we kind of had this uptick in wheelchair specific right to repair bills, just because that was the issue that right to repair proponents thought that they could at least get their foot in the door with. I think this year there's a surge in the ag specific because, again, they saw Colorado pass last year, and so they're thinking that might be the issue that they can get their foot in the door in this year. But so there's this concerted political effort because it's an election year. Democrats kind of see this as an issue that they can garner some favor with the more rural voting population that they've kind of struggled to get to come out for the Democrat ticket in the past. And if you didn't catch our wrap up last year, last, I want to say November, the White House did a call that was really they had all sorts of advocates for right to repair on this call, and they essentially just came out and said that states and Congress all need to pass some form of right to repair. That it's what the nation needs. And again, this was sponsored and actually put together by the White House, and they had several different levels of elected officials who have been proponents for right to repair all participate in this. And specifically, they had the 2 main sponsors for the Colorado bill on that call too. And so again, all of this is just kind of going into we see this as this concerted political effort that Democrats see right to repair as an issue that they can garner favor with the rural voters this year on. Eric, do you have anything you want to expand on there?
Well, I actually had something for you to expand on, which is, to back that up, you've done quite a bit of research and breaking down what sort of the primary bill sponsors look like, and maybe you can kind of share with people, some of the data that backs up why we believe this is a little bit more one sided. It's become partisan.
Yeah, and I apologize because these are going to be round approximations because I don't have that data sitting in front of me right now. But we put together a list of all of the sponsors for state level right to repair bills last year, and just did some looking at which parties they belong to and analysis there. And I think that across the board, we had something like 420 ish total sponsors who had signed on to right to repair legislation. Out of those 420 ish, it was right around 70, I want to say 79% were Democrats. And then that's a bit high. I think it was something like 75% were Democrats. And then something like 23% were Republicans, and then 1 or 2% were independents.
Yeah.
And so we really had kind of this overwhelming majority of bill sponsors at the state level being from the Democrat Party.
Yeah, and we didn't go back in time to see if that carried through, if you went back 5, 6 years, but I would assume that it's tilted more and more towards being a partisan issue for Democrats. And part of the reason for that is the advent of the MOUs last year. So there's a couple bullet points here. I would say that initially we probably had closer to 50-50, maybe 60-40. We had a lot of Republican bill sponsors. We battled a lot of, sort of so-called populist Republicans in a lot of states, in a lot of very conservative states, whether that was Oklahoma or Missouri or Texas, Montana, and in this into the South in Florida. With the advent of the MOUs last year, and now numbering up to 5 different manufacturers that have MOUs with the American Farm Bureau Federation, I think a lot of those Republicans are, who are aware of that, look at it and say philosophically, hey, industry has answered the call. It's a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. This, our industry is now a leading example of one that supports customer self repair, and they kind of address this. And so I think a lot of Republicans feel that way, and whereas Democrats still see a possible political gain, and then also are philosophically not predisposed to allow industry to come up with private sector solutions. They much prefer a legislative framework for everything. So, as far as the MOUs go, last year in states like Colorado and others, we had a lot of pushback on the effectiveness of the MOUs, and I think it was because the MOUs were sudden, and they went against the grain of the narrative of proponents, that we weren't making things available. And then when we spelled it out in detail what exactly is available, that argument started to kind of fall apart. So it took a little while, though, for I think that narrative to change. Narratives don't change overnight. Um, and so now we're seeing this year, I think, a lot more traction from the MOUs, and we're seeing that in places like Washington and Oregon, states that are even still have a Democrat trifecta and could be problematic for us, but they are seeing that and I think this also has a lot to do with the relationships. Like, we've been telling them we're going to do this. We've shown that we've done it. We show them that we're doing it. And I think that there are some reasonable legislators out there that we've worked with that recognize our efforts as an industry to address the issue and say, "Hey, good on you for doing that." And we've heard that directly from some of them. So they also understand that there's distinguishing products, that tractors and combines are not iPhones, but also that distinguishing products by the fact that we have an MOU and other products don't. So that's a big hurdle that we've crossed. And then I think the other really big effect of the MOUs is Farm Bureau engagement. And we've seen in states where the Farm Bureau, which all states have ratified, so the agreements between the American Farm Bureau Federation and the OEMs, each state ratified those agreements. Excuse me. And so, you know, the reaction that each individual state farm bureau has really makes a big key difference in how right to repair legislation plays out in these states today. And so if a state farm bureau is very active in opposing this and saying, hey, we have a private sector solution, let's let the MOUs work, then I think legislators are very reticent to say you know, hey, major stakeholders on this issue, we don't care what you think, let's do our own thing. But where the Farm Bureau is, you know, a little milk toast, and kind of lukewarm or steps back and doesn't really want to say anything, that's when we see other entities step up like PIRG and repair.org and iFixit and stuff, try to step in and fill the void. And that's really kind of a shame when that happens, because they're certainly not subject matter experts and don't understand our industry and are doing it for purely political purposes. Um, so the Farm Bureau engagement is a really big deal. And I think the MOUs now are starting to turn the tide in the legislative arena against further legislation. So
Yeah, and just to riff off that real quick too, you remind me here. Just for our viewers, the image on the right hand side there, you know, the title up top is current state government trifectas. So in case you're not familiar with that term, this is just referring to if the governor and then both chambers of the state legislature are all held by the same party. That's considered a trifecta. And an interesting, you know, fact that we also ran across whenever we were kind of doing this broad analysis of all the right to repair legislation introduced last year was every bill passed last year was passed in a Democrat trifecta state. So again, kind of plays into that reasoning of why we're seeing this, or saying, you know, why we're seeing this concerted political effort, and kind of becoming this partisan issue. With that being said, you know, we do have one state this year. We're going to talk about it here shortly. West Virginia, that is a Republican trifecta, that's moving a bill right now, but we'll get to that shortly here. And so, Eric, if you want to just to jump in here, you've been heavily involved in Vermont, so I'll let you hit on Vermont and Michigan, and I'll come back in for West Virginia.
yeah, so out of that map that we just, you know, that you saw a couple slides ago about where, you know, activities going on, and these are some of the hot spots that we see are still moving. There's been a lot of other hot spots already. There was kind of an early push to get legislation moving. In states like Indiana, there were also states like Kentucky that had bills that didn't even get introduced because we kind of headed them off and had conversations with bill sponsors early. So there were a lot of other states that we've already sort of put to bed. But these are the states that are still have activity. So Vermont is top of the list. There was a bill that H81 that passed the House last year at the end of the year, and then now has come to the Senate. It was in a different committee, I think Commerce, but the Senate Agriculture Committee pulled the bill back in to their jurisdiction, and so they're going to be holding hearings. Vermont has a very deliberative process. They have lots of hearings, which is good. And so far, they've held a hearing with a lot of the proponents, and we are planning to have a pretty robust showing in Vermont with opponents. And so that's you know, that's we're still setting the table for that, and you know, I think moving forward, Vermont, they seem pretty intent on trying to pass a bill, but we're certainly going to be pursuing amendments to it, and they've been reasonable thus far in accepting a lot of amendments. For Michigan, a little bit of a different story there. That bill was hot and heavy. It was a kind of a dogged fight. Um, I would say not a deliberative process, the opposite. And there's been some strange events occur in Michigan that have stalled the legislature entirely, and so the process there has really been delayed due to political turmoil and redrawn districts. So they've had they have a they had a couple they had a special election, and a couple of members of the House ran for mayoral seats in Michigan and won, and they were both Democrats, and the House was closely divided. When those two left, the House is evenly split. So all of a sudden, these partisan issues can kind of get rammed through, like right to repair, which has become partisan there. And then to add to the mix, they're redrawing districts in Michigan. Several of them have been held unconstitutional, so they have to redraw these districts, hold elections, and so basically, Michigan's kind of been on a delay for quite a while. They may not come back into session till April or something, and they have to wrap up pretty quick, and then it's election season. So Michigan's kind of delayed for a little bit, so we have a reprieve. But I'm pretty sure that the bill sponsor hasn't forgotten about right to repair and wants to push it through the House, um, and over to the other and then over to the Senate. So that's the story in Michigan. Kip, maybe you want to weigh in on West Virginia because you've been pretty close to that.
Yeah, so in West Virginia, almost immediately this year, whenever they came into session, a right to repair bill was introduced. Its primary two sponsors are the chair and the vice chair of the Senate Ag Committee. They also have a House bill, which was introduced by, I believe, a freshman member of their lower chamber. That one hasn't moved. The Senate bill has moved. It also has kind of had some weird parliamentarian oddities to it here. So some quick background, I guess, is last year the Senate president kind of made it clear that he wanted to pass some sort of right to repair bill. Um, they they took kind of an odd path in trying to do that, where the committee itself generated a bill very late in session last year and tried to really kind of shotgun it through the committee and through the Senate. It ended up not passing the Senate. They just kind of ran out of time to get it moved. But so this year, the Senate Ag chair and vice chair were officially sponsors, had this bill ready to go. It was immediately introduced. It passed a committee hearing a couple of weeks ago and went to the Senate floor, where apparently there was enough concern raised by testimony in that Senate Ag Committee hearing that the Senate re-referred it back to the Ag Committee for them to do some amendments. And so just a few days ago here, they essentially introduced an entirely new bill, and removed a lot of things that we had definitely expressed our concerns about. Notably, they completely removed any sort of mention of price or at cost, fair and reasonable. They kind of had that boilerplate template in there for price or the price of parts and tools and documentation was supposed to be at a fair and reasonable cost. There was a lot of discussion in their first committee hearing on this about what that meant, and they really got into thankfully to largely thanks to one of the senators kind of really hammering on this point of this is cost fixing, right? And so he really hammered this point home, and again kind of generated enough doubt, I think, in the senators' minds that they need to remove that. So they completely stripped any sort of cost fixing or mention of fair and reasonable. And so it's a pretty bare bones bill that has now passed the Senate Ag Committee. It's going to be on the floor for the full Senate to vote on here shortly. But essentially, what it does at this point in time is it makes it so that it only is applicable to equipment, or the parts of any equipment sold whenever that equipment is past its warranty time or warranty period. And then there's no stipulation again on having to provide parts or documentation or anything at fair and reasonable price. It just says that a manufacturer has to provide the parts documentation to anybody that requests them. So it more or less says that manufacturers have to continue to sell parts to people after their warranty. Eric, do you have anything? I guess one last unique thing that we saw in West Virginia there is they gave the enforcement mechanism to the Commissioner of Agriculture, which is the first time that we've seen that instead of the general or attorney general.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that was nobody knows quite how that one would play out. And kind of an oddity there, but that's all I've got for that one, Eric. Unless you've got anything more on that, you want to jump into Tennessee?
Yeah. So good update on West Virginia, Tennessee. There's a couple different bills, ag specific, and there was an informational hearing in the Senate Ag Committee, which the bill is not in. It's in a different committee. But one of these perennial people we have to hear all the time hold themselves out as an expert, and clearly they're not. Had a hearing in committee in Tennessee. It was sort of set up just for them to be there, and a couple of the Republican members of the Ag Committee, Senate Ag Committee, express some support for the bill and the idea of right to repair. And I think they're just misled and not really fully informed of the issue. So um, we're staying on top of that. We've reached out to them, and we're gonna try to keep that from gaining any steam. So that's what we see as I think the states right now that are kind of a hotbed of activity. But there's other activity going on the federal side too, right, Kip?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Luckily, it's not a lot of activity, but definitely stuff that we're keeping our eye on here. So last year, U.S. HR 5604, the Agricultural Right to Repair Act, was introduced on September 20th. The primary sponsor is Marie Gluesenkamp Perez from Washington. And then, so initially, this bill had three co-sponsors on it. It's up to six now. Eric, do you want to hit anything on more on that? You
Yeah,
kind of did the dive on that, so
yeah, they're all Democratic co-sponsors. So you've got Virginia, I think Spanberger. You got Mich. It's kind of the states that we've seen. There's a lot of activity in Michigan, Colorado, and Oregon, and California. So which is very different because the bill was referred to the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and it was last September that it was referred to the Subcommittee on Innovation, Data, and Commerce. And we've hit all of those members. Kip has been on the Hill to all of their offices to let them know what our position statement is. But what's interesting is that, well, two things. One is, speaking of all sort of the upheaval in Congress and a lot of the retirements, some of you may know that there's something like 47 members of Congress right now that are have elected not to run for reelection. And one of those that just announced was the chair of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers from she's Spokane, Washington, is where she's out of, and she's a Republican. And so, not sure why she's not running, but there'll be some big shakeups, regardless of how the outcome of party control of the House, just because we're losing a chair there, and there'll be some definite shakeups on the main full committee and on the subcommittee as well. Um, the other reason that we're have a little cause for concern is because of this HR 906, which is relates to motor vehicles. So it's right to repair for motor vehicles only. That bill is up to 50 co-sponsors, which is a lot for Congress, especially the fact that it's bipartisan, 25 Rs, 23, 25 Ds. The interesting thing is that it was also sent to the same subcommittee on innovation, data, and commerce. And just recently, on November 2nd, they had a consideration and markup session, and they passed that bill to the full committee on energy and commerce by a voice vote. So that was successful. And Kip, you visit a lot of these offices, and I think it's right now people obviously are making the distinction. There aren't 50 co-sponsors. There are no Republicans on the agricultural right to repair bill, but they certainly are on the motor vehicle side. But I think right now Congress, congressional members are making a distinction between the two, at least for the time being, right?
Yeah, and I've gone to a couple of the committee hearings at the that subcommittee on innovation, data, and commerce whenever they were hearing this HR 906. And the arguments there, the bill again is specific to motor vehicles, so it's not anything that's going to impact our industry in the immediate future if it gets passed. And the arguments around it are pretty interesting. They're definitely different than the arguments that we hear in the agricultural space. A lot of them, a lot of the contentious points really start getting into the data that is available through motor vehicles, right? The telematics, and I think the biggest vocal problem that I've heard from the primary sponsor, and I apologize because I'm forgetting who the primary sponsor is. He is a Republican though, but his primary concern was, and this goes back to MOUs, right? Because the auto industry has by and large been uh, exempted out of most state right to repair bills because they have MOUs in place. And at one of these hearings, the MOU was extensively discussed about how the auto manufacturers and repair providers came together and kind of structured that. And the bill sponsors' critique was that the association that was part of that MOU only actually represented something like 1% of the auto repair providers. And so, his point was that their MOU does not actually include a vast majority of the people that are supposedly need to be at the table. And so I think that just compare and contrast between their situation and our situation, specifically with since the MOUs have been put in place, is between the manufacturers and the American Farm Bureau. I think the American Farm Bureau overwhelmingly uh, represents a vast majority of the farmers in the United States here, and so I think if that critique were to come at our industry's MOUs, it wouldn't necessarily carry the weight because we definitely don't have that situation.
Yeah,
Um, and,
I was going to say that's a really good point, a good insight in distinguishing between the two bills, and maybe some of the reasons why um, 5604 isn't gaining as much traction.
Yeah, and then like I say, is the a lot of the contention in 906 comes around the sharing of telematics, and it's got specifically a couple of sections in there about essentially requiring that all data. And literally all data must be shared with any repair provider, and even the repair providers or the association that represents the repair providers has come back and said that scares them. They've specifically said we don't want access to all data. Like we don't want to be able to see where your favorite Starbucks is and all of that kind of information, which would be available to them if that 906 were to become law.
Yeah,
They just want the data that is necessary to do repairs on the vehicle.
yeah,
And I don't know how that necessarily equates to our industry. I don't think that I don't think that the concerns that the legislators have on that data being available in motor vehicles has necessarily come across in the same way for the ag industry yet.
yeah. Great insight. And then to wrap things up on the federal side for right to repair, we did want to alert you to the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, had a petition for requested rulemaking. Kind of an unusual deal. The proponents that we typically see, PERG and iFixit, uh, petition the FTC to tell them to make the request that they do a rulemaking. So it wasn't actually the FTC's any governmental action. But they do open it up to notice and comment. There were 1,800 comments received. So this may be a little bit of a coordinated effort we're seeing, just like the White House deal that Kippy talked about earlier. But certainly nothing immediate that's going to occur. But the FTC could take action on drafting rules. Um, and we have couple more slides to get through and leave time for questions. Wanted to hit on Canada. Kip, is it okay if I just cover this off real quick?
Yep,
Um,
absolutely.
so we do have Bill C-244, and it's kind of stalled out for the time being. Still sort of the same status, but there are some other things happening in Canada right now. The budget 2023 Canada provided some funding for right to repair consultations. KPMG was selected as the entity to carry those out, and there is a stakeholder meeting for fact finding coming up, and they do segregate those by different sectors. So there'll be a separate fact finding for the ag equipment versus consumer electronics. And so that's going to happen. We have some really good industry input, and NADA is leading the charge on that. There was another bill, a provincial bill that came up in um, PEI. The private member bill is 110, and this sort of followed the right to repair specific to ag equipment. NADA submitted comments to that, very robust comments outlining what our concerns were with that legislation, and we received a notable amount of replies from other MPs. And I don't think that's going to go anywhere at this time. It's just kind of an ill-advised, misled effort there. And then we want to make you aware, Kip, maybe you can walk us through what our Farmers Fix It page is. We went over this last time, but there's some important points to mention.
Yeah, no. So the NADA has a Farmers Fix It, the title that we've kind of bestowed it here, page at or on our website. It is under our advocate section, but on this page, so on the left hand side, you kind of see the top of the page, and then on the right hand side, if you were to scroll down on that page, is what you see towards the bottom of it. And so we provided all of the self-repair resources and then the MOUs by manufacturer. And so we've kind of just consolidated all of these, made them available via PDF links on our website. And whenever we're going to, Capitol Hill or state legislatures or wherever we are, going to advocate on dealers' behalf, we've started pointing them towards this, because we've really been finding that despite the MOUs being in place for some of them a year, a little over a year at this point in time, a lot of legislators just have no idea that they exist, or if they do know that they exist, they always have a question of, well, what is the MOU? They haven't read them, so they don't know. And so we've just consolidated all of those into one spot here that we can easily hand the web address over to legislators for them to see on their own. And then obviously the self repair resources. This ties into stuff that we've been coordinating with a lot of our dealers and with the manufacturers on, where we've been going to like Farm Bureau annual meetings and doing presentations on the self-repair offerings by manufacturer, just trying to help get both customers and legislators up to speed and kind of educate them on what self-repair resources are already available out there. And we've been seeing a lot of positive movement or positive engagement whenever we do any of those. Again, that's one of those things where every single time that we talk to people about this, you kind of see light bulbs go off, because they had no idea that they could go to the websites and look up the instruction or the manuals, or look up specific parts and see where the closest dealer with that part available was, or any of those things that all of the manufacturers kind of provide out there. Eric, do you have anything else you want to jump in on?
Yeah, I would just say that the biggest talking point or most effective talking point we've had around the MOUs is that they are a living document, and each of these MOUs has a built-in mechanism to get reassessed every 6 months between the stakeholders. And then the second thing is that there's a portal that the American Farm Bureau has for anybody, whether they're a Farm Bureau member or not, to go in and essentially make a complaint about one of the manufacturers, or not living up to the MOU or whatever it is. And I think that that's a huge deal for legislators to understand that, because legislation isn't capable of that same type of reflection. You know, once legislation is passed, it's rarely revisited unless it's really messed up, and so it's not a good mechanism to address something that has rapid technology and model changes, like our industry does. So, and then we also have some other federal priorities that we wanted to hit on real quick. Um, and Kip, maybe in the interest of time, I can just kind of run through these real quick. Uh,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
the Farm Bill reauthorization, we wanted to touch on. Essentially, we had this stat that over 200 members have not voted on a Farm Bill. Last Farm Bill was 2018. With the additional members of Congress, 47. That's over half of Congress that potentially that has not voted on a Farm Bill if it doesn't get passed this year. So that could be kind of scary. Right now, it is stuck in neutral. There's 75 billion in additional investments that both sides have called for all 12 title programs that have been outlined publicly. And so finding that additional money right now is obviously very difficult. The other thing that makes it difficult is just the reality that SNAP has become much greater portion of the Farm Bill. Since 2002 to 21, SNAP has increased 242% over and above what farm safety programs account for in the Farm Bill. What's also interesting is that in the next 10 years, SNAP is projected to increase 508% over the farm safety net. So those realities are kind of breaking down the traditional, SNAP, more democratic, farm bill programs, more rural Republican, sort of that compromise coalition that votes on this bill and usually gets past the finish line. It's just breaking down more and more and more. And so that's kind of stalling it out right now. So the farm bill surprisingly is kind of stuck in neutral and not really moving. But we're probably looking at another continuing resolution. Well, we have a continuing resolution that we're operating under right now until I think August or September. And so something needs to happen soon to get this rolling. And then
Well, no, I want to just jump in real quick to while we're on the House, Senate, and Ag committees there too. Is earlier we were talking about some of the members not running for reelection, and how that was going to play out with Kathy McMorris Rogers, for example. But this is another example. So the Senate Ag chairwoman, Debbie Stabenow of Michigan, is also one of those people. So she's announced she's not running for reelection. So the Senate Ag Committee is going to be in a similar situation going into next year of having a big shakeup. So just wanted to mention that real quick.
Yeah, absolutely, good point. And then some of the other things, some of the other factors that are playing into this, they just released the ag census data, and USDA came out with their projections for this year. So we're looking at a 25.5% decrease in net farm income, amounting to about 40 billion. So that really puts a cramp on things and puts things into perspective. It's a lot harder to legislate out of we have scarce resources, and they look scarcer. One of the interesting facts out of the ag census data was that there's a 7% decline in the number of farms and a 2% decline in farmland since 2017. So again, looking at those farm safety programs, those titles of the Farm Bill need to be bolstered. And just a real quick update on HR 3425, that's our Community College Agriculture Advancement Act. Basically provides funding for technician programs from the USDA to community colleges, junior colleges. We're up to 31 co-sponsors now, 16 Ds, 15 Rs. So thank you to the dealers out there. This is something we've been pushing, and we're gaining some traction. So hopefully this gets incorporated in the Farm Bill. And then we have, many of you have heard about the tax relief bill, technically the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act of 2024. The bill number is HR 7024. And, this was introduced and passed pretty quick. There was bipartisan support with the Senate Finance Chair is Democrat Ron Wyden from Oregon, and the House Ways and Means Chair is Jason Smith from Missouri. They worked on this and introduced the bill January 16th. It was quickly passed, 2 weeks later by a vote of 357 to 70, which is an extraordinary bipartisan accomplishment, especially in today's environment. But the bill, largely was paid for by discontinuing the employee retention tax credit, which was a program that came out of COVID. And but just by canceling that, discontinuing that, paid for the vast majority of this bill. So they were looking at a couple different things: increased child tax credit, research and experimental expenditures, kind of makes that retroactive, doesn't affect our industry as much. The business interest expense under Section 163J basically reinstates depreciation and amortization add back for that deduction for tax years from 23 to 25. And what we see is that most of this stuff is actually not permanent. It's just taking what was in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act way back in 2017, and all of those kind of tax programs are phasing out. And so now this bill is kind of a vehicle for at least temporarily bringing back some of these deductions. And another one of those is 100% bonus depreciation, which has been phasing out for the last couple of years, and extends that through tax year 2025 as well. And then important to us is the increase in Section 179 expensing, which was made permanent, but it was not indexed to inflation. So this bill would be a vehicle to increase the total deduction, 1 million to 1.29 million. And then it kind of tags that to inflation for the next couple of years, and it also increases the amount of threshold for phase out of the Section 179 expensing. I think it goes from 3 million to 3.5 million before it starts decreasing the deduction. So that bill right now, it overwhelmingly passed the House. It's in the Senate. There's a lot of competition in the Senate right now for whether it's immigration, Israel, Ukraine aid, so foreign aid bills. There's just a lot. There's a lot of competing large bills, large packages, and so it's kind of stalled out. And I think there's a lot of other senators, especially in an election year, that are trying to make it more what they want. I think everybody realizes this is somewhat a compromise. Nobody's getting exactly what they want, but I think there's still senators in there that want to make it so that it's exactly what they want. And unfortunately, it's kind of stalled out, and it's kind of lost some steam pretty quickly after a very bipartisan vote. So we'll see where that goes. We're keeping track of it, and we'll make sure. I think importantly, one is that our floor plan interest amendment for our industry is not affected, and then two, keep you updated on any of those pertinent changes to the tax code in Section 179 or 163J and bonus depreciation. Kip, maybe you want to just mention real quick what our activity has been here on the NAIDA PAC.
Yeah, so NAIDA has established a political action committee. We've got our timeline of events there. So officially, the NAIDA board approved this last November. Shortly after that, we filed with the Federal Elections Commission and gained recognition as a political action committee. So to be clear, this is a separate entity from NAIDA. It has its own bank account, its own EIN, and all of that sort of stuff. However, it is associated and sponsored by NAIDA. So the PAC committee is officially constituted of 5 dealer members and 2 staff. And more information will be coming soon to our dealer members.
All right, great. Yeah, we're excited about this. It's a big a big deal for the association, and planting our flag there. So yeah, be on the lookout. And then to wrap it up, we have a couple of additional state legislation regulatory issues. And unless you're in California, you probably aren't really aware of this. But if you are in California, you're feeling the crunch of what they call their ZEV regulations, zero emission vehicles. essentially starting this year, it prevents purchase of non-electric service trucks beginning in 2024. Really, any trucks for the dealership. But what's of concern are the service trucks, because there aren't really any electric vehicle substitutes for those, heavy duty service trucks. And there is an exemption process in place, but the burden is on the dealers to show that there are no zero emission vehicle substitutes on the market. And it only allows for replacement of current service truck vehicles once they pass certain mileage and year thresholds. So it doesn't allow for a dealer to go and expand their service truck fleet by purchasing a new diesel service truck. So it's pretty wild. That is in place as of this year. The regulations are really not in place. That, of course, California got the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse, rather, and don't have finalized regulations on these exemption processes. The scary thing is there are additional states considering the same framework, whether that's Oregon, Washington, Colorado, or Connecticut. Some of these states want to adopt the same California standards. The same, it can be shown on the OPE side. In Washington State, there was a bill this year, HB 2051, that tried to adopt the California Small Off-Road Emissions prohibition. So those are SOAR prohibitions, which basically eliminates gas-powered outdoor power equipment. Fortunately, those bills are federally preempted by 40 CFR Part 1074 110B. Basically, just a part of the federal code that says no states are allowed to regulate emissions for small engines, except for California, of course. So even other states are not allowed to do that. So the bills that we see like this are preempted. That bill is fortunately dead, but we are seeing OP bans proliferate under non-emission regulations in a lot of states. And we're just kind of seeing this progress. So it's something to be aware of. I think these, zero emission vehicle regulations, and same with outdoor power equipment, that is going to continue to spread over the next 10 years across the country as things do that emanate from California. It seems their number one export is legislation to other states about bad ideas. So at any rate, that's kind of where we are. I know we took up a bunch of time. We're almost to the top of the hour. Maybe we have time for one question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we had one question come through, so we will ask that one and then I guess wrap things up. Can you elaborate on the messaging that was in the MOUs that were issued last year?
On the messaging, I guess I'm not quite sure the question.
Yeah, Eric. So I see the question in the chat. I think the question was, can you elaborate on the MOUs that were issued? The messaging was question mark. So I assume what they are getting at is how 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 are we messaging the MOUs, or what how are the MOUs being used to message what?
Well, I guess it would be that we have a private sector solution, and our industry is a leading example of one that supports customer self repair. The MOUs are specifically to benefit owners and independent repair shops, and spells out in great detail what is made available to them. So it really is truly a private sector solution that also is a living document that can be reassessed every 6 months for any changes, and keeps up much better with model and technology changes and the transformation in our industry, much better than legislation could. So I think that's kind of the messaging. And so far, I think we've been really successful with that. Legislators have been very receptive to those arguments, and I think they're doing the job that they should, and letting people know what's available, and that we're meeting our requirements, living up to what we say we're going to do.
All right. Well, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us. Like I mentioned earlier, the presentation was recorded and will be up on the Farm Equipment website in case you want to go back and review it. Keep an eye on your email in the Farm Equipment newsletter for more information on when that's available. On behalf of Eric, Kip, the NAIDA team, and the Farm Equipment staff, thanks for joining us for today's webinar. There'll be a short survey that pops up once you leave. Please let us know what you thought, and you can always reach out to me directly with any topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.